today what we're going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about assessing site potential for northern hardwood stands, the soils, the habitat type that we have here, and then a little bit of logging history. Gary mentioned some of that, but I'll cover a little bit more of that as well. We'll talk about what typical northern hardwood management could entail. We have a process for helping us determine what type of management we do on the northern hardwood stand. There's several tools available to foresters to help them decide what to do. Then what those tools point us towards are different management options in northern hardwoods. And then I'll just kind of describe what a prescription for management or harvesting in a northern hardwood stand could look like. Finally, we're going to end a little bit further down the trail at a vernal pool. And Gary's got 3 different vernal pools on the property. They're really neat geological features and aquatic features. I'm going to talk about just exactly what a vernal pool is, the importance of vernal pools if you have one on your property, and the importance of protecting it. And then there's a great fact sheet on the DNR, Wisconsin DNR website about vernal pools if you want to get more detailed information about them. So that's what we're going to cover in the next 35 minutes, which reminds me I got to set my timer. so I stay on time. There we go. I'm on the clock. So site potential and history. When you talk about site potential, I guess in the soils, I'm going to start with, big picture for as far as soils. There's a great booklet for Wisconsin. It's called Forest Soils of Wisconsin, an overview. And what this does is it describes the different major soil types and forest soils that cover the state. And what it says here about this area here, Sawyer County and surrounding counties here, we're in the northern silty upland and plains. It's a level to gently rolling landscape, and yeah, it rolls here quite a bit because there was a lot of glacial action here. But that kind of depends on the parent material that the glaciers laid down, whether it was glacial till or outwash or lacustrine deposits, which are deposits from water, from a lake bed settling out and then the lake eventually drying up. There's a silty layer of about 2 to 3 feet thick in this northern silty plains, and it covers most of the region. And that silty layer was deposited either by wind or water, thousands of years ago after the glaciers had left. And the silty layer really leads to very productive soils. And they support very productive northern hardwood stands. So, and so the soils are productive, they lead to the northern hardwood stands, and pre-settlement times, before the first loggers came through here and before the first settlements, this whole region that we're talking about, the large area around here, was initially vegetated with these northern hardwood stands. A lot of hemlock, a lot more hemlock than you see today. Yellow birch, maples, and basswood were the pre-settlement trees that were really on these cover types. Now if we drill down even closer locally here on Gary's property, then he's got a silt loam soil. Again, that silty layer, specifically then this became a silt loam soil. Now a loam soil is a soil that has equal amounts of sand, silt, and clay. That's how soil is made up of, sand, silt, and clay. And loams have an equal amount of sand, silt, and clay. A silt loam just has a little bit more silt in it than either sand or clay. So it tends more towards the silty side of things, so it's called a silt loam. And again, it's a very fertile soil. It holds water, but it allows that water to be taken up by the roots of trees and plants. Unlike clays hold a lot of water too, but they hold it so tightly that oftentimes that water is not available for plant uptake. So the silt soils really are a good thing here. So that's a little bit about the soils here. Next we're going to talk about the habitat type that we've got on this specific area. And again, for us foresters to really determine what type of management to do on a site, we really have to assess the site and its capabilities. Knowing the soil helps us do that, which we just talked about, but then also another tool is a habitat type classification system that allows us to, it's a tool that foresters use to assess site potential, whether it's a good site for management or a bad site for management. And it gives us, points us towards different management options on a site. And what it does is it differentiates different areas in the forest based on the amount of moisture that's available for the plants and the trees and the amount of nutrients that are in the soil for the plants and trees to use. And so moisture, you can go to very wet sites, you can go to very dry sites, and then there's everything in between. Nutrients, same thing. You got poor nutrient sites with very few nutrients, and you got very rich sites and everything in between. So the particular habitat type that Gary has here for his northern hardwood stands is, and these habitat types are named after the specific trees and plants that help to identify them. So this particular site, habitat type that Gary has here in his northern hardwood stands, is the sugar maple, sweet Sicily, and blue cohosh habitat type. On the nutrient scale, it's a rich to very rich nutrient regime, and on the moisture scale, it's a mesoc moisture scale. It's not too dry, it's not too wet. If Goldilocks was here, she would say it's just right for moisture. So the sugar maple, sweet Sicily, blue cohosh habitat type is really an excellent habitat type. Typically it's found associated with ground moraines from past glacial activity, which we've got some eskers and other activity of glacial work here. And it's associated with medium to well-drained silt loams and loams, which coincides or jibes with what soils we do have here. So we're right on top, right on spot there with the habitat type there. It represents conditions that are really optimal for plant and tree growth. And in fact, this habitat type here has long been considered probably one of the best habitat types to grow northern hardwoods on in all of northern Wisconsin. So great habitat type, growing the right timber type on here, the northern hardwoods, you're going to get good quality hardwoods if you manage them correctly. So these northern hardwoods are dominated by sugar maple. There'll be some basswood. Gary's particular stand has a lot of basswood in it as well. A few red oaks, maybe some white ash in here as well. The understory beneath the canopy, there's a lot of sugar maple regen underneath. There's also some ironwood and some other things too, but he's got a lot of sugar maple underneath, and that's what in this habitat type you'll most often, for tree regeneration, you'll see a lot of hard maple, sugar maple. As far as management in the sugar maple, sweet Sicily, blue cohosh habitat type, both uneven and even age management is appropriate depending on the particular conditions. If you use uneven age management, you'll tend to maximize the quality and the quantity of your hardwood logs and trees. If you move towards even age management, it's going to encourage greater tree species diversity. You'll get some of the species that maybe some more ash or maybe some more birch in them than just a lot of hard maple. So those two, the soils and the habitat type, are two of the tools we use to assess quality of sites and the applicability of certain types of management on them. And if you've got questions about any of this, just feel free to raise your hand.
I've got one, John.
Yeah.
So a northern hardwood forest typically does not have a lot of red oak in it.
Um, it can have some in it. If it eventually gets a lot more, it might be more appropriately classified as a red oak stand.
Red oak
But
forest. Okay.
so it kind of there's a line there where you can have it associated with it, and then if there's a lot more of it, maybe it's more appropriate as a red oak stand.
Okay.
So, okay. Question?
Off the wall question. How do you expect the Japanese beetles to affect the northern hardwoods?
Japanese beetles.
They're just coming into the area and they are
Are they?
they're ferocious. Are they going to affect the maples and
You know, I've seen them. I come from around Green Bay, and we've had Japanese beetles for quite a bit there. I've seen them really do a number on basswood trees, defoliating smaller basswood trees. As far as maple, I'm not sure. I think they might. I can't speak to maple, but I know they love basswood.
certain plants that they're just ferocious?
Oh yeah,
I got them in my garden.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know what the copper looking cherry?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all over my fields.
Are they?
I mean, they're in
Oh,
my
boy.
nettles. They love nettles.
Okay.
They're
Yeah,
on my-
there's a lot of plants that they'll eat.
Bean fields?
No, just if I don't have seeds, but
Oh,
berries like blueberries and raspberries are all over.
oh yeah.
Silky loam soils,
Yeah.
is that more or less what you're talking about here?
Yes, yes. Gary's got a silt loam soil here. I don't know the specific series that it is.
Because where does clay fit into that?
Well,
Clay
clay.
can be absent,
There'll be maybe a certain amount of clay in there,
yeah?
and that kind of all those differentiations between the amount of sand, silt, and clay kind of characterize different types of soils. Maybe it's a silty clay loam
Okay,
or a sandy clay loam.
but silty loam is pretty ideal.
Yeah, silt loam is pretty ideal for northern hardwood growth. Yeah, yep. A little bit about the history. Now Gary covered some of that, and you've got it in your brochure here too. So, as he said, the property long ago in the 1880s was first logged off for back in northern Wisconsin. Back in the 1800s, they were logging the pine. The pine floated down the rivers so they could get it out into the mills for use. In the northern hardwood parts of his property and or in the surrounding area, there probably wasn't a whole lot of white pine, maybe a few sprinkled in there. There are other areas, other sites that grew a lot more pine. And they were logged back in the 1880s. Then, of course, some time went by in the 1920s with the advent of better roads and especially railroads coming into northern Wisconsin. Now they didn't have to float logs out, they could railroad the logs out, and so then they came in to get the hardwoods. And a lot of northern Wisconsin then was really creamed off for all those hardwoods and pretty much laid waste when those hardwoods are all taken out. And that cutting in the 1920s was pretty much the genesis, the beginning of these current stands around here and pretty much in the whole region and much in northern Wisconsin. Those hardwood stands date back to the 20s and the 30s, when after that logging period was done, the natural regeneration started coming up. So that's some of the ancient, not ancient, but the older history. Again, Gary and Kay bought the property in 92. They had a thinning in 96 or so, taking out a lot of aspen and thinning the hardwoods. They took off about 17,000 board feet, so that's pretty decent, over 15 acres. They bought a 20-acre addition, and that had a thinning in 96 and 97 also. So currently, and you may see some of the trees marked as we move down the path a little bit. He's got a sale marked in here for thinning out the area. He's got two northern hardwood stands. Where we'll be is his main northern hardwood stand. It's more of an upland stand. He does have one that's a little bit wetter. There'll be some black ash mixed in that one. We won't get to that today. That's more on the north end of the property. But he's got a sale marked in those areas, currently out for bid, and about 30 acres or so with that. And most of that volume in that sale is basswood. that they're taking out with some hard maple and some black ash as well. The boundaries for that timber sale, his property boundaries, it butts up against his property boundary. The property boundaries are marked in blue paint. That's pretty typical for property boundaries off of private lands. The sale boundary on the interior here is marked in red. You'll see red paint on the trees for marking the sale boundary. And then the individual trees to cut are marked with orange paint. So we'll see some of those as we move on down the line there too. So that's a little bit about the current management that's going on at this point in time. Any questions about anything yet? Yes.
You're talking about marking the trees. Now I see one right there that's got orange paint on it.
Okay.
Now, what about the rest of that clump? Does that orange paint on that one tree indicate the whole clump goes, or just that single tree on there goes? How to what? Okay. So one tree mark. I see one tree mark.
Must be a bachelor.
Now, does that indicate the whole clump goes, or?
I think he's just wanting that one tree to cut. Matt, do you know anything more?
Yeah,
Like
he's
there's
kind
like
of splitting that clump. So on the left, on John's left, there's a basswood back behind the bigger one also marked. So
Right.
I mean, he's basically
Yep.
selecting 50% of that clump to get cut.
And my question is, why wouldn't you take that whole clump out? Because with the recent weather we've had, with the snowstorms and wind, we had some bad windstorms that are knocking a lot of trees down. I just had logging a few years back, and a tree like that, or something like that, that basswood is gone. It's going to be busted off with the windstorm. So why wouldn't you just harvest it and get back to younger, grow? Leave these younger trees open that up.
Sure, you certainly could. I mean, foresters argue about this stuff on the tailgate until we're blue in the face.
I had a private landowner or private forester take care of my forestry, and he cut mine. I mean, I could see sunlight coming down all over, and the brush was right next to mine is a county was logging 2 years prior to that, and the overstory is completely shading the ground where there's no sun getting down.
Sure.
Yeah. I can see the difference with the difference in the trees and.
So with clumps, clumps really pose a dilemma. One of the things we'll look for in a clump is where, if you take the center line of each tree and you go down into the soil, or not, or maybe the center line of the trees meet above ground. The center lines for these are below ground, so that's a good indicator that there no rot from this stump, absent any wind damage. If this doesn't get damaged by wind, this stump, when it gets cut, this tree, when it gets cut, the stump will eventually rot. Because they're not really connected above ground, no rot should really be moving into this tree. So that might have been what he was thinking, that it's separate enough that, absent any wind damage, which is a possibility, this tree should really not be affected by that cut. So that might have been some of his thought process. I guess we'd have to.
I mean, yeah, it's different.
Because a lot of times the
But
stumps.
I just, notice like there, would that indicate what that whole clump goes, or
Yeah. Usually, when I mark, if I'm marking a whole clump, every tree gets cut.
Yeah, just-
so there's no question.
okay. So here you're just taking that single stem
Like-
and trying to leave the rest up.
John, what kind of access does he have for the loggers? Is he expecting to use this little trail?
Yeah, this would be some of the access.
So they'd have to
on this
widen
trail.
it, obviously.
Yep, it'd probably have to be widened a bit. Yeah. Areas, they fill up with water. Gary said that earlier this spring there was this much water where we're standing right now. But since then, it's been such a dry spring and summer, the water's dried up. It's evaporated and soaked in, and so there isn't any anymore. And that's a defining characteristic of these ephemeral ponds, is that they hold water for a few weeks to a few months a year, and then they dry up. Another defining characteristic is because they dry up, you won't find predatory fish in an ephemeral pond. When there is water here, there won't be fish in it because they can't survive the drying. They hold the water There's an esker right here, and you heard about eskers from Kelly, and the bulk of the esker is that coarse material, gravel, sand, rocks, and things of that sort. Well, the very finer materials, the clays and the silts, they settled out on the edges and down below the esker. So down below here, what helps hold the water in is a very thin layer of either clay or silt that kind of creates a bathtub, if you want to call it that. So for part of the year, this fills with water, and eventually it soaks in and or evaporates. But it's because of that little layer down below that holds the water. It impedes the soaking in of the snow melt and the rainwater in the springtime. You know, and this isn't that big of an area. It just goes over there where you can't really, where the shade begins again. This is the extent of this vernal pool. He's got a much larger pool on the north end of his property. The importance of these vernal pools is that they're very great habitat for different forest amphibians, salamanders, tree frogs, wood frogs, different invertebrates. They use this area in the springtime when there's water here for breeding habitat. And also they tend to be a little bit cooler, moister. You know, after the water dries up, these amphibians are still around here. But it's great habitat for those amphibians and invertebrates. And those in turn are great food source for smaller mammals. The bugs and the insects, the flying insects and things, are great food for bats. So you'll often find bats associated with vernal pool areas because they can get a quick meal in the evening times when the bats are out. And that's important because, you know, bats are dying out around the state. So whatever can help bats is a good thing. And these pools can be, the amphibians that use them sometimes are so specific that they come back to the same pool that they were bred from to come and do their own breeding. So they were born here, they go out and do their thing during the summer months of the year and over winter, and then they breed back here the following year where they were born. So if something happens to this vernal pool and it doesn't stay as a vernal pool for whatever reason, because it's damaged or filled in with whatever, then those amphibians have lost their breeding grounds. So how can we protect them then? Well, one, because of that thin layer that is kind of the bathtub, if you want to call it that, you want to protect that. So if you are doing any type of equipment use on your property, whether it's logging equipment or anything of that sort, don't do it through the vernal pool area. Don't create ruts that may break through that thin layer, and now you've got a leak. And it won't hold as much water, or may not hold water at all, because you've broken through that impermeable layer, and now the water just seeps on through in the springtime. So protect them from equipment use and damage. Try to avoid felling trees in the tops into the vernal pool and disrupting, the nature of the area itself through logging tops and things. You may want to designate sort of a buffer area around the vernal pool. These are considered a forested wetland. So the Wisconsin BMPs for water quality that are set up for wetland areas apply to vernal pools as well. So a buffer area of maybe 15 feet or maybe more if you want to could be designated on the perimeter, again, to avoid rutting in that buffer area and to avoid harming any salamanders or frogs that may be in that immediate buffer area as they're foraging for food and that sort of thing. And then if you do have a buffer area set up, or even if you have these on your property and you have a property map that you're using to help you manage your forest, marking it out on your map the pool itself and maybe even the buffer area itself on the map, so you know where it's at. So if you're having a logger come in, he knows where it's at and knows where to stay out of. So delineating the pool area itself is a great way to protect them as well. So, any questions about vernal pools? Kind of a neat feature to have. I know we have, there's where I drive into our cabin in Florence County, it's been really wet there for a number of years in the last 10 years. And there's some pretty deep holes in pool areas, but they've been filled with water. They just haven't dried out because it's been so wet. So they've been holding water for quite a while.
We can look in ours about in June or so, and you can just see all the eggs from the salamanders and the frogs and the toads and that. There's just piles of eggs all over.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yep.
They
it's
reproduce.
really beneficial.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about not putting equipment. So we have one that's up near our gate,
Okay.
and the loggers. Now I'm realizing how much damage those particular loggers did, but they left so much junk and garbage. I call it garbage. The treetops and the bottoms that
Yeah.
my husband, because the wildlife loved that little vernal pond,
Yeah.
that when it dried up, he took the bulldozer and he cleared it all out. And ever since then, it all filled right back up with water. So we obviously didn't damage the pond bottom because we got all the garbage out because it was difficult. And we said, well, it's going to be a pond forever. We could tell that.
Yeah,
But-
so
It filled up nicely, and now it's full.
afterwards, now it's full. So perhaps, yeah, I don't know. I guess you'll have to see in future years whether it still retains that ponding of water and drying up, or if it holds water all year long.
Well, so the only thing I can figure is because we had this cedar bog, and so it's all watery there, that I'm guessing that there's got to be some kind of groundwater moving through that area
perhaps.
and maybe filling it.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Can I just
So-
add something? The woody debris that she was talking about is actually good. You want to have the woody debris that left over. They always say you want to have a clean kitchen but a messy woodlot. And that's what they want to
But
put
this
there.
was really bad. They would they threw, to me, it was like, why would you throw all, we're talking, what do you call the bottoms of the trees? The big
Oh,
root balls?
Okay.
Oh,
Huge root
Oh,
balls.
my.
Yeah.
no.
It was
that's-
just
Yeah,
we're
so-
not talking like logs.
Yeah.
They would
Yeah,
just
and-
throw
and-
all the root balls.
And there's a difference
No
from
wetland.
trees naturally falling over into the vernal pool and decaying and everything versus actually actively felling them so they fall in there and leaving the tops in there, because that kind of might overwhelm the pool itself versus kind of a natural event.
Yeah.
This
Well,
was a
you said
natural.
it's by your gate. They may have built a road onto the property for the logging, and they pushed trees out, pushed stumps out, and they probably thought, well, let's just push them into this wet hole
That's
over
what
here
they
because
did.
it's just wasteland. Nobody will ever want that
That's
for anything."
exactly their thinking.
So that's what happened. They just
Okay.
pushed all their junk into your
Yeah.
wet.
Three
could be.
spots like that they did.
Yeah.
So that's
So
what they're
it
thinking.
was their logging road. What are we going to do with these stumps? Put them in the wetland.
Yeah, put them in a hole, fill them
Put
in
'em
a
in a
hole.
hole.
That
Nobody-
seems to be
No,
That
but
was their thinking. I
That's just
think.
junk land.
a
Nobody
lot of holes and ravines got
Yeah.
filled with
That
junk
doesn't have
over
any value.
time.
So what
Just
if there's a big blowdown, a big windstorm comes through and knocks a lot of trees into your ephemeral pond? What's the guidance you're supposed to follow then?
Leave it be.
That's what
Leave
I'm
it be?
saying.
Just
Just
leave-
leave it.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's.
I mean,
if you're in there
maybe
cleaning
some
up,
winter
you can
logging
salvage.
if you can get in there in the wintertime when things are froze up and not damaged. Again,
Oh, the
whatever you can
bottom.
do to not bust through that impermeable layer.
What if it's
So,
a lot of small stuff like that's here?
You've got this aspen. That's merchantable aspen.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
and that could be harvested on frozen ground in the winter if you can get on there without breaking through. But if it's
Yeah.
too soft, then you really
Well,
shouldn't try to take
yeah.
that out of there unless you can reach in and pull it out without getting into the wetland.
Yeah, we
I
should.
know, like in
Good
our,
bad.
Loggers aren't worse.
the little branches like that, that's where the salamanders and that all attach their eggs to.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
the little stuff, you don't want to keep it real clean.
Yeah.